Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sree. Joining me today is Rami N Desai as we look at the rare earth race that is taking place in Myanmar. In fact, Cox's Bazar has become a very interesting place. I'm going to talk about that also. But first, let's welcome Ramiji. Ramiji, namaskar and welcome to PGurus channel again. How are you?
Namaskar, how are you? Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for making time at such a short notice to come on this channel. Ramiji, I'll tell you, if you look at the ongoing trade negotiations between China and US, one of the things that US was forced to climb down on was the fact that it needed the rare earths badly from China. And in exchange for that, they have said that they will not deport the 300,000 odd Chinese students who are studying in the United States. 300,000. In fact, it is such a high number, Ramiji, that 50,000 of those are in one state, California. And in California, children born in California are unable to get admissions in the UC system, the UC Berkeley, the UCLA, the UC San Diego system, as well as in the state universities. Because these people from China, they pay out-of-state tuition, which is 2 to 3 times more. And universities love that kind of money. So they are willing to stick it to their own in order to accommodate the Chinese students. And what are the Chinese students doing? They are establishing Confucius Institutes, essentially spying organizations. The goodwill that was built over 50, 60 years or more than that of the UC system is completely being laid to waste. So that is one side. So rare earths is one thing that we know exists in Myanmar. And the story is that China has its hands to that, and now United States wants it. So you take a place like Cox's Bazar. We know that US has a presence in St. Martin's Island. That's not very far from Cox's Bazar. They want to have a straight land route so that it can facilitate easy movement of refugees. People say, well, it's not that. It is just to make sure that the United States Army has access to get to the place where the rare earths are being mined deep inside Myanmar so that they can get access to it. So in Cox's Bazar, if I think about it, this has become Asia's Cyprus, Ramiji. You have India, you have US, you have Bangladesh, of course, you have Pakistan, you have Myanmar, and you probably have Russia too. I mean, there isn't much left. So all these are happening, and looks like Manipur was another thing where they wanted to carve out a Christian state. I don't know where that is. So lay it out all for us. What is happening after Trump came? We haven't had a discussion, and I'm hoping that you can cast some light on this. What exactly is going on in the rare earth race?
So I think Myanmar is a very complex country. It's very layered. The kind of stakeholders, there are many. You have over 200 ethnic armed organizations at this point. There is a conflict with the 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏's announced elections in February. That's what they've been promising that they'll do, which means that some ethnic armed organizations have come overboard and some still haven't. So we have to look at Myanmar in a very nuanced way. Of course, any area where there is conflict and which is rich in natural resources will have critical earth minerals. Any river beds where you find tin and gold, you're sure to find heavy rare earth elements. So it is not entirely correct to say that it only comes from one region. The reason that there is focus in the Kachin areas is because that is closer to China, and China buys 80% of the heavy rare earth elements and critical rare earth materials from Myanmar because they have the processing capabilities, and the Kachin area is closest to their borders. But I've spent a lot of time in Myanmar. I've met with the ethnic armed organizations. I've met with the 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 very, very recently. And I've traveled these areas. I've met with the organizations that work across our borders as well. I've entered from the Thailand border and met organizations from there as well. So if I may say so, I can say this with a certain amount of certainty that a lot of the very active organizations that I met have already identified places where mining can happen, which is in other areas as well, apart from Kachin, across the Chinwin riverbed, in Chin areas, in Arakan areas. They have over 1,000 spots that they have already identified. However, to mine, to process, or to even transport are very, very difficult things to do. It's obvious that China has managed to do all of this because they've been in the business for a longer time. They have that kind of foresight, and the way they work, the way a one-party system works, they don't succumb to street veto or any sort of public pressure. So if they're buying minerals, if they're buying rare earth elements, it has its own repercussions. For example, a lot of the rivers that are in these areas which are mined cannot they cannot have potable water for the next 20, 30 years or so, if not more. The leaching process that is used in this processing, or even in the mining, to take out these elements, has long-term repercussions on the environment. Now, if any other country was to do this, there would be a certain amount of backlash. China doesn't have that backlash. Number two, they've also been able to figure out ways of transportation. Now, when I mean by figure out ways of transportation, it's not just in terms of routes. It's not just in terms of roads, roads that can be used for transportation, but it's also in terms of negotiating with the multiple groups that control these routes. So these routes are controlled in terms of different ethnic organizations have different controls on different parts. Very rarely will you find one straight route controlled by one ethnic armed organization. So to be able to negotiate with individual stakeholders on that transit route is also something that they have mastered. So China obviously has their game plan ready, in function and in practice for a long time. They're way ahead than any other country. Now, if any other country needs to come, and please allow me another minute on this, because like I said, these are very complex situations to understand. If any other country wants to come, which they will want to come, it's not going to be that easy. It's not going to be quick. Because how do you gain an entry point? Who do you start negotiating with? How many people do you negotiate with? How do you set up your mining structures? How do you set up your transportation routes? I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying it's not easy. There are other places, they don't need to clash with China. There are other places that they can, any other country can do this in. But one must also remember, whether you speak about the 𝗏𝗏𝗏 or you speak about the ethnic armed organizations, the lands that they control are very near and dear to them in terms of an emotional connection. Their ethnic identity is very close to them. Any country seemingly wanting to come in and break that ethnic identity will not be taken kindly. Those lands will not be given to them. So there is all this politics also of ethnic identity. So I think when we look at what is happening in Myanmar, there's a lot of potential. The West has green transition aims and goals up till 2050, which means they want to transition to green technology. For that green technology, you need terbium, you need dysprosium, you need neodymium. You need elements that are crucial for EV manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing, solar windmill manufacturing. So where is that critical earth mineral going to come from? It's obviously going to come from conflict zones very often. And I've written many, many times. I've been writing about this for the last couple of years. I've been speaking about this for the last couple of years. And I've used the same analogy to remind people of a sentiment we used to, sir, as you may remember, we used to have in the late 90s of the blood diamond politics.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's the same sentiment that we have here. That time it was diamonds and mining, and that came into, conflict areas, and that came into light of how the manipulations were happening. Today it's Myanmar, except it's not diamonds, but it's critical earth minerals being manipulated off a conflict area.
Very true. And I forgot to ask one question. I forgot to mention one question. To whose drums does the Arakan Army beat to now? India, United States or other, or the highest bidder? What are your thoughts?
So the Arakan Army beats to nobody's drums. I've met them recently. They're a very sophisticated ethnic armed organization. They have militarily grown. We must remember they're the youngest in the country, and yet they've become the most formidable. They started in, I think, 2009. By 2006, when Aung San Suu Kyi came into power, 2016, they put up a great resistance. Their demand was for more federal-like structure, which Aung San Suu Kyi did not deliver. Even though they had a chief minister, the chief minister was not Arakanis. It was one of an examples of a failed federal promise. And therein they grew, but they grew in such a fashion where they worked like a very mature ethnic armed organization. So as a result, they are possibly the most powerful right now, one of the most powerful in the whole, mosaic of ethnic armed organizations. And like I mentioned, over 200 of them. They were initially trained by KIA, which is one of the oldest armed organizations in the country. But after that, obviously, they, as you said, they walk to the beat of their own, their own beat, their own drums. But yes, they are in a precarious position because we heard about the humanitarian corridor that the US had proposed. Of course, it was proposed on the shoulders of Bangladesh's very illegal interim government. The NSA, the newly appointed NSA, was appointed so that something like the humanitarian corridor can be proposed. And when you talk about even critical earth minerals, amongst many other factors, it's via the humanitarian corridor that a lot of these things would have been possible, including militarization of the corridor. Many a times we've seen the humanitarian corridor taking a different shape under the benign name of it being humanitarian. Many a times we've seen it fail in West Asia and other places. It has never been the greatest of ideas that has come up. However, this was proposed in a way for vested interests from the West to have a foothold in Myanmar. Whether it was to counter critical earth mining is only one of the reasons. It was also to contain India. We must always remember that, any strategic move, any political strategic contestations anywhere in the world now are not singularly seen. You have to have multiple reasons to do it. So it was not only to counter China, it was to counter India. It was not only for a Christian state, but it was also to have a foothold. Of course, they thought that that foothold would come via the Arakan Army. But the Arakan Army has fought long and hard for its own identity, and therefore it's hardly likely that it's going to allow any other party, any other stakeholder wanting to be a stakeholder in these areas to come in. That also a foreign hand. Also, the Arakan Army is very well aware about the design of a greater Christian state. Now, whether that is only at this point in spoken words, but they are aware of those designs. So that is also something that would keep them, I assume, very wary of any third-party interference. We must remember that right next to the Arakan state, the Rakhine state, you have the Chin state. The Chin state has international interference, has had a lot of international organizations mediating between Chin factions. And these come particularly from a Christian lens. Now, not saying that just because areas are Christian that they are anti-this or anti-that, but saying that international agencies have a habit of manipulating the religious demography of these areas. Arakan is aware of that. So I think when we talk about the Arakan Army, we must understand that they are very, very well networked, militarily very well organized, internationally very well they're very knowledgeable, so they understand the larger games. It's not going to be that easy for anybody to come in. But if they do come in, and people are going to keep trying, because not only does the Rakhine state, as you know so very well, has ports like the Chinese port of Chapru, also Sitwe port. It's a very, very interesting area. They will want to, in my opinion, want to split Arakan, so as to have control over the area. This is something that Arakan must be very wary of. And this is something India must be very wary of, because, it's right across us. It will have repercussions on us. We have ambitions of the Kaladan multimodal project, our Sitwe port. Many investments and assets are there. Only recently, I think it was day before yesterday, that Minister Sonowal, one of our most senior politicians from Assam cabinet, union minister, has said that that we will be completing the Kaladan multimodal project by 2027. If that ambition is to be fulfilled, then we must ensure that no international party comes in and tries to create any sort of problems on ground. So Arakan, I believe, is here to stay, will negotiate with the 𝗏𝗏𝗏, and I think there are very exciting times for them to, for us to see develop in the Rakhine state.
So how does it generate revenue to maintain its army?
That's a really, really good question. It's the kind of question that you can keep questioning, and you will hardly ever get a answer that will be to your satisfaction. But we can obviously analyze this and do our guesswork. One of the ways of getting income for a lot of the groups, not just Arakan, is the trade routes. There is tax collection on the trade routes. There is also a deal that we know has been struck with the Chinese for the for resumption of construction of the Chapru port. We know that Arakan also lends its soldiers to other groups across Myanmar. So these are pretty much the major ways of generating income: tax collection, control of trade routes, control of ports, sending your boys as mercenaries, so on and so forth. The Arakanis, if you remember, one of the times that we'd spoken about the Three Brotherhood Alliance at that point that had been launched against the 𝗏𝗏𝗏. So it included MNDA, and this was in the northern Kokang region. It's very far away from Rakhine State. But the combination of the Three Brotherhood Alliance was MNDA, TNLA, and Arakan. So Arakan had managed to send its troops that far. So obviously there are many ways. Some groups, not Arakan, some groups are also involved in lending its bases, the areas that they could control, their soil, to the manufacturing of illegal activities, manufacturing of drugs, cyber scam units, so on and so forth. Now, where those drugs are distributed from, those trade routes also have high value in terms of tax collection. And we're not, again, talking about a couple of trucks coming in. When we talk about critical earth minerals, heavy rare earth elements, it is said, and it has been told to me from the horse's mouth on the ground as well, that there are over 800 trucks that go into China every single day. So these are very, very active trade routes. So the money is a lot.
Now, Ramiji, from what I understand thus far, United States can't take this raw materials from here and have it, refined somewhere else. US just doesn't do that. Labor costs, if it takes back to you, assume that they have barges that can take it back to US, the cost structure doesn't allow it. So at best, what US can do is to disrupt the flow of these illegal mining operations that's happening in Myanmar. What do you think is United States endgame here? And also talk to us a little bit about Bangladesh, because the State Department is firing a lot of people in the United States now. Whoever is left, see, there were the big ones, there were a couple of ladies. Uzra Zeya was one. I'm forgetting the other one. Very senior position. They were the ones who were having this, religious zeal to somehow teach India a lesson. With another guy who sits in the loo more than his office, and they're all gone now. Everybody's history. And I don't know about Paul Kapoor, who happens to be, he is a professor at Stanford. I don't know much about him. I haven't met him. I don't know how that new surprise is going to be from his side. But be that as it may, talk to us a little bit about what America hopes to achieve in Myanmar and the future of Bangladesh.
Look, I think at this point, 90% of the critical rare earth elements, heavy rare earth elements, land, 80-90% land in China, and 90% of that landing is in the West, because it's processed and then sent over. To the extent that there are laws in the EU as well in the US that state that you cannot buy critical earth minerals from conflict areas, but they don't state that you can't buy it from second party. So this is how that that they've been buying. It's been around for a really long time. So when the tariff war happened, it was China who first said we're not going to sell critical earth minerals to the US, and immediately US backed off a little, but also announced that it was going to do mining in Pakistan. So they've realized that they need to have other bases as well, which they already do to some level, but it's always easier to go to a country technically that you don't care about sacrificing, because you sacrifice these lands for decades to come. People have to migrate. It's not just about the environmental damage, but it's also about people who live in these areas who have to migrate and are displaced. So that is the kind of cost of conflict that one pays, but it is also the cost that other countries that don't care about these areas are willing to, endure. They are willing to pay that price. So America's work like that. And like I said, it's not very easy for them to disrupt this, because the northern Kokang regions, the northern areas, KIA-controlled areas, are controlled by ethnic groups. These ethnic groups may not like the Chinese so much, may want to open channels where they can sell to other countries. But those countries have to have borders, because it has to use the land route to reach these countries. And if they can do that, then they will also have a price leverage with China. A lot of these ethnic armed organizations are also of Chinese descent. Even though they are of Chinese descent, I don't think it is an important factor to note. But I don't think we should give it more weightage than necessary, because the Chinese this side are very different from the Chinese on the Chinese side. So there is some amount of conflict there, rivalry there, but there is some amount of meeting point as well. We must, when we're looking at conflicts or conflict areas, we must not look at them as black and white. We must look at them as gray, because there's always multi-alignment that's going on. There isn't just like, oh, we hate you and we're not going to deal with you. That doesn't happen. So it's not very easy for the US to disrupt it. But of course, we know that there has always been designs that the West has always had on South East Asia, these trade routes, these channels of not just I wouldn't just say transportation, but there's a certain amount of soft power also that India exerts in these areas, which brings them far closer to us, far closer to the Chinese than to the West. If I may take your memory back to NSCN, which was one of the most formidable insurgent groups, the longest running insurgencies in the Northeast. We know from history that it was the Americans that came in. There was a certain amount of support that came in from the deep state, and it was also them who split them. So if it's happened before, it can happen again. Also, like I mentioned earlier on, that the West would have interest in these areas, because it not only gives them access to a larger region, but it helps them contain not just China, but also India. It helps them have access to the Bay of Bengal. It helps them have access to trade routes, like India's Act East policy has this ambition of, the Asian Trilateral Highway or the Kaladan Multimodal Project, which essentially connects you to the rest of the region. Why would they not want the same sort of control? The idea of a Christian state has always been there. The idea of a Christian state has always been a part of their greater foreign policy. Why would they give up on that right now? They tried it with Nagaland. It didn't work out. Our national identity is far stronger than they give us credit for. It didn't work out. They eventually went for South Korea. So why would we think that they've dumped that idea now? Now, whether a dispensation is changed or not, I believe that the deep state is very difficult to change. If the dispensation had changed and it had had a great impact on us, see, pre the Trump dispensation in the US, they engineered a regime change in Bangladesh. Right now, whether one accepts that publicly, whether one takes responsibility of the aftermath of this terrible regime change, of very dishonorably displacing an elected government and replacing it with an illegal, and I keep saying illegal because they're not elected, government that refuses to leave now, even though they've announced elections. They've announced elections on the basis of Awami League not being a part of it. So it's not really going to be a fair elections. But anyway, coming back to the dispensation, the US having done this, when Trump came in, it's not as if the humanitarian corridor was not announced. It was still announced. It isn't as if Yunus didn't do his rounds right after Trump's announcement in America amongst people who have interest in Bangladesh. It's not as if the NSA that has recently been announced in Bangladesh didn't come with some amount of networking in the West. We know very well that he has great connections. We know very well it wouldn't have happened without the blessings of the West. And it happened very, very suspiciously because it happened when the army chief, the Bangladesh army chief, was out of the country. How is an NSA announced like that? Clearly it happened behind his back. So these games are still being played. We also know that when the humanitarian corridor was announced, it was the recently bombed the air base, the American air base in Qatar, from where 2 USAF planes landed in Bangladesh and DIA presence was already there. So these games continue because it's not just about the dispensation changing. Sorry, please. I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Sorry. A couple of expansions on the acronyms you are using. CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. NSA is what?
National Security Advisor.
Of Bangladesh. Appointed by who?
It was appointed by Yunus. Exactly. Why should it be appointed by anybody? It was appointed by the Yunus-led government. But he is a former United Nations senior operative. So, he's very well versed with the whole Western Western institutions. And like I said, this happened when the Bangladesh army chief was out of the country. A huge appointment like the National Security Advisor would not happen like this ordinarily in any country.
Now, where does Bangladesh go from here? Because a couple of things I'm just playing this out, Ramiji. They are close to 12% or 8 to 12% Hindus in Bangladesh. You cannot genocide them. There's just no way to do that. Let's assume that somehow they all leave Bangladesh. Then what is the incentive for India to give them livestock, rice, and free electricity? Electricity that they are enjoying but they're not paying for. India can just switch off the power supply and go home. Go do whatever you want. So don't you think that the Yunus, even if it's a temporary government, has that much understanding of what lays in store for them? Because my information is 342 young women have been abducted from all over Bangladesh. We don't know where they are being kept. We have no clue what happened. And because the Hindus are scattered all over the country, there are villages where there's just one family, which is Hindu. You saw that thing where one Hindu woman, they took turns in raping her and took the whole thing as a video. It's horrible. So what gives them the brazenness that we can do all these things and India will continue to give rice, continue to provide electricity for which they are not paying, continue to provide all the other things?
So I don't think Yunus really cares, and I think we have to accept that. I think he's been brought out of nowhere and put in a position of power that he has not earned. Therefore, there is this sort of, if I may say so, this sort of megalomania that he carries with himself. He's not somebody, even at the advanced age that he is, that is going to give up power. He thinks, a lot of people who haven't earned their way into a political environment have these ideas that they can do this, they can bring China closer, they'll have Pakistan coming in. Look at the kind of advances that they've made in Pakistan. Who ever thought that Bangladesh or Bangladesh's government could sell their souls the way they have in terms of, it was the same country that they had had liberated from. That's why it's called the Liberation War. But anyhow, Yunus has decided to do what he has to do. So I don't think he cares. I don't think there's a long-term plan. However, whatever has happened with the minorities, I think we are all on the same platform where we think it's reprehensible, and the moral and the legal responsibility of that is firmly on Yunus's shoulders. The pressure is building up, no doubt, on the interim government that there should be elections. Therefore, they've announced elections. Like I said, even the BNP that once celebrated the ouster of Awami League and thought that once the Yunus-led government comes in, that they will be put in positions of power, has also been left disappointed by Yunus. Therefore, when elections happen, the dynamics are going to be very, very different. Let's not forget that even Jamaat-e-Islami that we were so fearful of has shown internal fault lines. Therefore, again, it's not like an entire homogeneous, tightly knit group that, is supporting, as a whole, is supporting Yunus. So I think the pressure is building up. I think elections will happen. I think any party that comes in now, even if it's not the Awami League, even if it's BNP, realizes the value of India, because geographically you cannot really separate it. And that goes for us also. We must realize that as much as this is, absolutely, the situation in Pakistan is unforgivable, and it is deeply disturbing, not just to Hindus in India, but any Indian, that this is happening across our borders. The fact of the matter is that there is not much we can do with the geography of Bangladesh, with the people of Bangladesh. We have to play this really, really carefully, because if Bangladesh was to fail, where do you think radicalized populations are going to come in? How do you think you are going to be able to control them? So for us, our best bet is a stable Bangladesh, a Bangladesh that we have good relations with, and a Bangladesh, mind you, that we haven't lost goodwill with on a ground level, because it is that goodwill that will help us have a foothold in Bangladesh in one way or another. That is why they keep bringing up this whole India out thing, because there are people who use that as political gain. And therefore, it makes it more important for us to have that sort of relationship, people to people connect. Now, when you talk about, do these guys not understand? I believe that you talk about the government. Yes, the government does not understand. The government does not care. Yunus is not a man of great foresight. We have to learn to accept that. Does a common man understand that? Again, it's not a straightforward answer. There is the common man, no matter what religion he is, that holds India in great regard, not just because the liberation war that India played a great role in supporting the great freedom fighters. It gained a lot of goodwill. That's why you had somebody like Sheikh Hasina who worked with India the way she did. So you still have people like that. But also because every time that there is a need, it is India that has stepped up. Let me give you the example of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka had this, again, anti-India sentiment that had cropped up, that has been used as a political ploy, only to last till they went through the economic crisis where it was India that stepped up. And when India stepped up in this new dispensation, any of that anti-India sentiment dissipated because no country could do what India could do, because we have cultural relations, we have subpower relations, we have economic relations, plus we are the most stable country in the neighborhood. Look at Myanmar. People have tried, countries that we've spoken about have tried for there to be an anti-India sentiment. There is none, and I have walked the talk in terms of I have walked the ground. There is no anti-India sentiment. Why? Because when the earthquake happened, it was India which was first responder, not just in terms of providing aid, but also in terms of providing manpower. Our people were on the ground within 24 hours, helping people, providing first aid, clearing the rubble. So this is the kind of stuff that we do have goodwill, and I think we must maintain. Bangladesh is going to be a difficult proposition because of the years of goodwill that has been reversed by the Yunus-led government and the entry that it has given to agencies like the ISI. They have boots on the ground. The kind of deals that have been made, military to military, high-level deals with Pakistan. The kind of organization, Sultanate-e-Bangla, that has come up, which calls for a greater Bangladesh, which means to encompass all of the Northeast. This is their design, this is their map. Funding is coming in from countries that have greater caliphate ambitions. Qatar, Turkey. We must study these, their entry into our neighborhood much more closely. So I think, we have to wait and see how things develop, but I don't think it's going to be easy for us, but I don't think it's going to be easy for any radical elements operating in Bangladesh either.
Thank you so much, Ramiji. And, I'm glad you mentioned Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, they're playing host to Field Marshal, or Kheti Marshal, as they call in Hindi. And he's going to be visiting there. This is supposed to be a diplomatic visit. If Sri Lanka is so friendly with India, they could have easily brushed off this visit. This is definitely something where saying that I matter, that I am the king of Pakistan, or whatever nonsense he wants to call himself as. So I'm sort of looking at it in a little bit of what I would call mixed feelings. At the same time, I know my country, United States, is not blameless. Last question, according to you, who engineered the coup, China or United States?
Well, I don't think anybody knows. One can only speculate, and I don't think anybody will accept that they've done it. But I do know that I have written about it for many years before the coup happened, 2 years before the coup happened, because if people like me, mere observers, and other writers as well who had mentioned this, could pick up on hints that a coup is coming, I think it was pretty evident that the West was getting uncomfortable with the Sheikh Hasina-led government, because it was them who put sanctions on the government. It was them who, it was the European Union and the US, as well as Australia and other allies, that kept calling for free and fair elections. Nobody else had pointed a finger. That put sanctions on the elite paramilitary forces in Bangladesh, the RAB, that put sanctions on senior Awami League leadership. It was also the same group, which was the Biden-Clinton group, that of people, supporters that that lobbied for Muhammad Yunus's Nobel Prize. It was the same people who promoted him as the savior of Bangladesh. So I think pretty much the signs were very clear. And I think, again, this was because of the growing influence of China in Bangladesh, the growing influence of India in Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina's refusal to agree to a lot of the asks that were made. her visit to China, which unfortunately her last visit to China was not a very successful visit, unfortunately or fortunately, but it really riled up a lot of sentiments in the West. So I think all of these reasons came together, and I think the West really supported sort of regime change and the ouster of Sheikh Hasina.
So your verdict is the West. Thank you so much. And I mean, I've had others say the exact opposite thing. Basically, everybody is agreed on one thing, that whoever did the backside, the shoulder was of Pakistan, ISI, the Jamaat, all these riffraffs that have actually done it on the ground. This is what I hear. But excuse me. Thank you so much, Ramiji. I promised you 20 minutes, but it took 40 minutes because the questions were, your answers were so good that I couldn't stop asking you the follow-ups. And I really, really am thankful for you to give that time for us. Viewers, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We'll be back with Ramiji in a few weeks. Namaskar.